we give a performance through light, through movement of the camera, through our movement with the camera that enhances what the emotions are for the story. If acting is acting and reacting, that's really another aspect of what we do as cinematographers.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Hollywood Reporters Cinematographer Roundtable. I'm your host, Beatrice Verhoeven, and I'm joined today by 6 of the most outstanding directors of photography this award season. On behalf of Wicked, Alice Brooks. On behalf of Dune Part 2, Greig Fraser. On behalf of Nickel Boys, Jomo Fray. On behalf of Maria at Lachman. On behalf of Gladiator 2, John Mathieson. And on behalf of Emilia, Pérez, Paul Guilhaume. I'd love to begin and just hear briefly from each of you what your introduction was to the profession and what made you recognize and appreciate the role of a cinematographer.
So I grew up in New York City to a playwright father and a dancer and singer mother, and we were super poor. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment, tenement apartment, 300 square feet with the bathtub in the kitchen. And although we didn't have a lot of money, there was so much love in our house and art and artists always filtering through. And to help our family out, my sister and I, my mother put us into child acting when I was 5 and my sister was 3. And I fell in love with the camera people. And I knew it was something I wanted to do. And when I was 15, I had my last audition for a movie called While You Were Sleeping. It was a Sandra Bullock movie, and it was my 7th audition for the part, and it was between me and the girl who got it. And after the audition, I knew in my heart I hadn't gotten the role. And so my mom and I went for a walk on the beach in Santa Monica. And as we were walking, I said to my mom, I don't want to be an actress. I want to be a cinematographer. And she said, I know. And I looked down and there was this little gray and white feather, and I picked it up and I still have it. It is in a broken frame that I carry around the world with me. And she said, what can we do to make your dream come true? And I started doing still photography in high school and writing stories, visual stories. And I applied to film school at USC, and we didn't, my mom made me walk my application in, and she said, we don't have the money to send Alice here, but she deserves to go here. And 2 weeks later, I had a full scholarship. And then I thought that was the best day of my life. And then, of course, 25 years later, it has been a crazy journey.
My journey, I think, kind of similar to Alice, started really young. I have a picture of myself kind of behind a video camera telling my parents at like age 7 that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I remember at the time, I kind of grew up thinking, constantly changing my ideas, like, oh, I want to be a scientist, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be this, I want to be that. And I remember the time thinking like, I want to do film because that way I can live the life of and think about the life of a scientist for 3 months, and then think about the life of an astronaut for 2 months, and then spend time thinking about being a firefighter for 5 months. And it felt like this ultimate hack somehow that I think in looking back now, I think at some level it was a fascination maybe with empathy and wanting to just understand living a life in someone else's shoes. And that kind of spurred me on to work at a public access television station growing up as an editor, and kind of just always doing theater and film stuff growing up, making movies alone. And I don't think I specified what role in filmmaking I wanted to do. I just loved making movies and kind of grew up just constantly making movies with my friends. And I remember when I first saw In the Mood for Love. And I remember calling my mom that night and saying, like, I think I saw one of my favorite movies. And she was like, what was it about? And I was like, honestly, maybe like 15 minutes in, I stopped reading the subtitles and I was just completely enraptured by the images because I feel like they were transferring emotion into me. Like there was a purity of that connection and a purity of taking in the feelings that I think I recognized in those images. And it was enlightening. It genuinely kind of, I came out of the theater feeling, whoa, watching Mark Lee Ping Bing and Christopher Doyle's work just brought me to a whole other place. And I think that it was at that moment that I specifically became just obsessive about image making and just the ability to evoke these emotions and just connecting to that first desire as a child, which was, I think, connecting and trying to have a relationship of compassion, to think about another person's life, and ideally be able to then create an image that evokes that in someone else.
I don't know. I just like movies. I think everyone does like movies, but I kind of drifted into it. I moved to London, found other people who were mucking around with cameras, and went from there. You know, short ends, someone lending you this, someone lending you that. I couldn't get into the union saved my life. They were horrible. They were bigoted. Rupert Murdoch reading nasty people. So, but along came music videos. I shot. I don't know how many we shot. I mean, they let you in. You didn't have to have a union ticket to work on that. But at the same time, we were lots of independent cinemas in London. Watch Napoleon, watch Trial of the Will. You know, you notice the photography, I think, and you remember. You know, if a film's still staying with you after 3 days later, you don't really know why. Music videos came along. I'm sort of mid-20s, and I sort of got on board those, and then one thing led to another, and ended up in drama. That's about it.
I grew up in Pérez in France. My mother was an art teacher, but she was also doing photos, and so I since I was a kid, I was surrounded by images, I think. So I think very early I thought I wanted to do cinema, and we didn't know anyone who was doing cinema. But there was this line producer that my parents knew from her wife that was a journalist, and one day she just took me on the side. I was 14, telling me, okay, you want to do cinema, well, what do you know about it? And she told me about the journey of a director preparing a movie, meeting directors, writing the script, and etc. And one of the parts was meeting this person and talking about the look of the film, and maybe go to the museum to see pictures and say, oh, the film could look like this painting. And I thought, okay, I want to be this person at this moment. Yeah. So I was 14.
Well, I grew up with a father that was an amateur photographer, and I abhorred photography. I took the position that it stole your soul. And then I went to art school, and I took this survey course in film appreciation. And it was Italian neorealism. It was a film by De Sica, Umberto D. And I was so taken with the film because it was a sound film, but it was basically a silent film. It just observed this old age pensioner who loses his dog. And I realized, I go, wow, those images just don't get up there on the screen. There's a reason why. And so then I got taken, and also it was much easier. I was always interested in the found image, something that you see, that it was so for me, it was like, oh, you could put together images to tell a story. So then I started to shoot my own little films, like portraits of people, but I always thought about painters and then people asked me to shoot for them, and I thought, oh, this would be a cheap way to learn how to make filmmaking without the expense, because then it wasn't digital, it was 16 millimeter Super 8. So that's how I kind of fell into it.
My journey sort of began kind of not really knowing anything about the film business. I probably like most people here, but I did enjoy photography. Like I was kind of a teen that was a little bit misspent youth, not knowing what I wanted to do, like having lots of ideas. I played in a band for a while. I was lead guitarist in a band, which I'd love to play you a song later on if you want to hear it. But I clearly wasn't very good at that. And I started getting pretty good at photography when I was in high school. And I really enjoyed it. But I also didn't understand what a cinematographer for cinema was. I knew what a cameraman in the news did. I understood that you would go to a news story and film that. That wasn't of interest to me, but creating sort of art images was. But it wasn't until I joined a film studio, it was a film photography studio, that I actually saw a cinematographer work and realized that, it was the best of both worlds. I could create images that we had dreamed up. And what was exciting about that was that it told a story, and you could be instrumental in telling of that story. And probably the biggest thing that I found was that it was quite fun around people. Like photography is a lonely business. Like you walk around taking photos, it's all insular inside your head. Whereas when you're on a film set, you can't really get too inside your head because there's people trying to get into that head. So you've got to kind of be kind of a lot more maybe extroverted than one would be normally. Like, I think my natural state is not that.
Obviously, at the start of one's career as a film cinematographer, one might not have options about who you want to work with, but in the time you've established yourselves, how have you guys picked who you work with and who you want to work with again? I'll quickly note that some of the films you're representing here this year, many of you have reteamed with directors that you previously worked with. For example, Ed, you previously worked with Pablo Larraín on El Conde, John with Ridley Scott on the first Gladiator, and many other films. Greig with Denis Villeneuve on Dune Part 1. Alice, you worked with John Chu on In the Heights. What makes you want to work with someone again?
You just build a familiarity with that person, and generally there's a reason why it worked out on the first film, so they want to work with you the second film.
Ed, how would you choose a film with a director that you haven't worked with before, though? Because
Well,
everything that you do is significantly different to each other, and I think that's a bit
well,
of a testament.
like with Pablo, I had been seeing his films and meeting him at different festivals, from his early film, Tony Manero, to No, to The Club, and all his films were totally different visually. Not all directors are visual, but if you have the ability to work with someone that's visual, that understands what your contribution is, that's what is going to excite you. So I'm sure everybody here wants to work with directors that are visual, that understand the cinematic language, that the way you tell a story influences what the story is. And it isn't just coverage, it's not just representation, but it's the interpretation that creates the emotion for those images that translates the story. So that would be the biggest reason. And generally, when you work with someone that you connect with, you want to continue that.
You get out of working with other directors, multiple directors, you actually grow yourself as a result of having done that, which you can then bring to the next project with another director or even with the same director.
John, how do you feel about that? Because you've worked with Ridley, I believe this is your 6th collaboration with him, right?
I mean, he chose me, as simple as that. I'd like to say that, you can choose. I don't think you really can. There comes a point you can't wait for something anymore,
Right.
and you have to jump. And, if you like the script, you like the director, well, that's something. If you don't like one of those, you're in trouble. And, you look at the credits on my thing. I mean, I've got a lot of people put in some crappy commercials on your IMDb, and I should get them to clean that thing out. There's a lot of rubbish in there. But people remember 3 or 4 films you've made. But just before this one, I did a film for 2.1. We had it away for 2.1. And no one's going to see that. But I thought it was really good. But no one's going to see it. And everyone, you're the Gladiator guy. Give me men in leather miniskirts. Off you go, Yes, you do well. But it's a curse. I admire Ed. Everyone wants to be Ed. He's got better hats than I have, for one thing. So, I admire his, diversity of those. When you make a film for 2.1, I don't know what I got paid. I don't mean to sound great. I just never asked. Because I thought, well, what am I going to do? It's Thursday, let's shoot a film. Everyone just talks about films all the time and never gets them made. Then along come these juggernauts and you make them. And then you want to do something in that middle distance. When I started, you could get a film for about 17, 20, 30 mark, and you'd have a few big days. You have days of extras, you have some proper costume, you could do this. You're either doing these massive things, having a huge feast of food you can't eat and stuff everywhere, or you're fighting like dogs on the table for a bone. And you've got to sleep in your own beds, and everyone's got to have their own cars, and because you cannot afford to do something that dreams, and that's a shame. But anyway, we did this film 2.1, and it was big. It looked massive, but that was, because you can bring things to the table because you're clever, because you've done all these clever things. So you better be bloody clever by now. So I don't know. I don't really choose them. I mean, you go and look out there, and you think, what do you want to do? Men in underpants with lasers coming out their nostrils again? No. When we all got attracted to this, when we were younger, it was different. Now it's very narrow. I mean, you know, Dune, I love it. Beautiful. You know, there's some really big dream films you can watch, but a lot of it is like, there's no difference when you make these big fancy films. And between you, me, Seamus, whatever, they all just. So I don't know. I don't. This idea you choose the project is not really true.
You can choose not to do it though, John.
Huh?
You can choose not to do
Well,
it.
yeah, there's been plenty of that, and I've waited plenty of times. I waited for months, even years, for people to make a film, and just to watch them just dry up, and miss so many things because I believe that it happened.
True.
But that's why I just want me to for 2.1 and say, what are we doing on Thursday? Let's shoot a movie. Let's go. You know, so we haven't got any money. Fine. Let's go. You know, what do you got? Steal a camera, steal some lights. Let's go. You know, what's all huff and puff about? You know.
For me, it's been I've known John Chu since film school. So we went to USC together. We bonded over our love of musicals when we were there, and we made a short musical film called When the Kids Are Away. And then his career took off, and we didn't see each other for a few years. And then we started doing this little web series together, the first Hulu original content called Legion of Extraordinary Dancers. And that's when we started to form our group of people that we work with today, that I just saw a whole bunch of. And we just are this really amazingly tight-knit team. And he always has believed in me. And I think someone who believes in you and trusts you and is able to speak the same language has been really lucky for me. And there are jobs I go in knowing 100% I wasn't getting the job. Like, John made it very clear. He's like, but I don't care. I want you to shoot this movie. So you're going to go in and meet with the studio, meet with the producers, and then I would do my very best and walk away, and didn't get the job. And it was year after year of no. And then one day things changed, and suddenly he was at the point in his career where he got to make his own choices. In the Heights was the first movie I never interviewed on, and I never interviewed on Wicked. And it's just the thing for me, you know, you get, as all of us get all these scripts, and we meet all these directors, and we don't get to choose, as John said. Like, the projects come to you, and I'm very lucky because the people I work with are interested in hiring diverse crews and telling stories about diversity, and that for me are the kind of stories I want to be telling too.
Jomo, this was, I believe, your first time working with Ramel Ross, who had himself shot most of his previous work, right? For that reason, was he very clear of what he wanted his film to look like? I read in a previous interview that you did, there was a shot list that was 33 single-space page typed out, calculating every shot.
For me, thinking about working with a new director, I want to work with someone who I'd love to dream together with. Like, I think that maybe it's, I don't know, a hot take, but I think that I love signing on to a script that I can't pre-visualize. I can't close my eyes and see it. Like, if it is beautiful to me as I'm reading it, or I feel like I can see it, to me, I don't feel like I'll be truly challenged as an artist to do it, because I'm already half of the way there thinking about what it could look like. Like, I love taking on a project that is fundamentally going to be a challenge for me, not only as a cinematographer, but as a filmmaker, but as an artist. And, you know, for the movie Nickel Boys, the entire movie is shot from a first-person perspective. So, again, that was a situation when I was reading the script, I was like, I don't really know what that means. And I think even our earliest conversations were kind of sitting down and really talking about, okay, well, what does first person mean? And in the conversation of first person, you know, we came up with this concept that we called ascension perspective. You know, we would use first person with the crew so people could kind of pre-visualize, but for us, it was idea of this sentient image, an image that it was less concerned about what it looked like to see, but more what it feels like to see. And towards that, an image that's just always tied to a real body, a real person with real stakes as they're kind of navigating, in our case, the Jim Crow South. Like, what does that feel like? What does vision feel like when someone's going through such an oppressive system around them? So yeah, for me, it was truly the excitement doing Nickel Boys because it was sitting down with someone who does have a photography background. So we could really get into our ideas around what is the image and what we wanted to express visually in this movie.
Would you say right now that you took away a lot from that process, having learnt from that director, given that he'd shot his own stuff before?
Absolutely. I think that there's a way that him being a photographer and a brilliant photographer, and a photographer I had referenced long before I even saw Nickel Boys or kind of came onto this project, that there was a way in which being a visual artist outside of film, he just thinks about images in a totally different way. So our conversations always felt so fruitful. And also with this movie, it's like, it was a totally different relationship as a cinematographer to capturing an image from inside the scene, because there's a way in which, traditionally throughout my career, I've maybe witnessed through the camera people's emotions, scenes, but quite literally for a lot of it, if I was operating the camera, if Hattie, one of the characters, hugs the protagonist Elwood, it's me she's hugging. Physically, the camera quite literally has to respond to the actor, has to respond, and it has to be vulnerable. It has to be truly inside the scene and a scene partner to the people that are with him. It's I think a greater witnessing that maybe taught me maybe a deeper compassion around composing images and thinking about actors having to be a little bit more on their side of the line across this production.
Visually, how do you arrive at a game plan for the look of your film? Paul, for example, I know that the idea for filming of Emilia Pérez changed a little bit, and you shot very operatic style. Is the filmmaker asking you, how do we make this happen? Or is he just telling you, make this happen? Or is there a conversation somewhere in between?
Well, it's true that I've always until now kind of been afraid of being the only person that would carry on the style of a film. I think it's not my role. It's not the way I see it. I really feel that I have to be here to make something happen that's maybe latent somewhere. Very often you can feel that reading the script and you mix it with the personality of the director of the previous movies he's done. And maybe you just kind of can imagine if something can happen. Almost by itself, and I have the feeling that very often you're like scratching dinosaur fossils, and you're just working, and in the end there is the structure, the image of the film that you just found, revealed maybe. Yes, with Jacques, I say this because it was a collective process of many people sitting in a room for many months, and in the end you don't know where the ideas come from. They just circulate, and probably at one point everybody in the room has said this very idea that finally someone just grabbed the latest in the group, and so it doesn't belong to anyone, the ideas, I think. And in Emilia Pérez, it was first due to be like a very gritty handheld film shot in Mexico, and something else was, let's shoot an opera on stage and we'll do a lot of lighting effects. And the two projects, they gradually merge into one. When imagining shooting in Mexico, we're realizing during location scouting that the film would be very much to the ground, maybe too much, and the opera would be maybe not in the world enough. So it's with work and with approximations that we found the idea of this film.
Interesting. Greg, I know, and I don't know if Dune 2 was the same, but I read that Denis wasn't very prescriptive of how to lens the first one. Was that the case with Dune Part 2 as well?
Being a Part 2, we kind of got all of our technical foibles out. There's a flip side to that coin where on one hand it's fantastic, on the other hand it also can sometimes make you confident that you've solved all the problems. Whereas, if you're making a film, as Paul just said, you're constantly looking for what the film is. As Jomo just said, you're constantly watching and trying to sort out what is this film we're making. And, there was an element of like, we knew what the film was because we'd made it, but actually we didn't. And we were discovering it as we went. I discovered at the end of, the beginning of Part 2, that he actually didn't like the anamorphic lenses we were using. So, which is a really tough time to hear about that when the film's out, you've done it, and he came to me and said, "Oh, mate, I just don't love those lenses," and I was like mortified because like my lenses are like, you know, my babies, and I personally love those lenses, but ultimately as the director, he is the guy he is the guy, like that's his choice. And every job you do, I do still, I learn why a certain director just completely goes ape over anamorphics, like Matt Reeves, for example, who just every time I show him a funky anamorphic, his head explodes in a good way. To Denis, who would probably freak out if I showed him that same lens. Like, it's trying to kind of get into the mindset of each of these directors to understand what makes them tick and what helps them tell that story more.
Does Ridley at this point in your collaboration still kind of give you pointers, or is he like, John, you know what to do it?
Yeah, no, not much discussion, I'm afraid.
He's just,
No.
you've got it.
I mean, yeah.
Was the process different on two? There's so many years between them, John.
Yeah.
Did he
The only
change?
The difference to me was film and digital.
But did he change? Did he change evolve his style?
Yeah, I think he's moved with the times. I mean, he's made a lot of films between those two. A lot. I mean, he's very prolific. I mean, the language of films got faster. You don't have to explain or be sort of, well, what would you say was pedantic about setting stories up anymore. It's a shorthand, which I think we thought about as music video directors.
You relied so much on practical effects and also big budget sets. John Chu said he hasn't seen anything like that before. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, shooting everything pretty practical, like 95% of it, and then how much you were involved with the VFX after.
Yeah, the first movie has very little blue screen in it. We shot on 17 stages over across 3 different studios, and our sets were built fire lane to fire lane, floor to all the way to the Reds. Every single inch of every stage was used. 2 of our sets were the size of 4 American football fields each, 2 of our backlot sets, and we had 4 backlot sets. So it was John, Nathan Crowley, our production designer, and our visual effects supervisor, Pablo Hellman, and I all had a conversation very, very early on, maybe a year before we started shooting, that we wanted to do as much in camera as possible, that our goal was to make an old Hollywood movie and not rely on visual effects. And of course, we do have visual effects. We have visual effects characters, we have animals, but I had real practical sets to light. John Chu is a director who likes to be able to go in and shoot 360 degrees. And so I would pre-light every Saturday and Sunday. I worked 7 days a week from January 2nd to July 18th when we got shut down for the strike. I only had 7 days off during that period of time. The sets were so massive that there was no other way to do it. People have said to me that the ceiling in the Wizard's throne room, how was the set extension on that? There is no set extension. That is all real. When John and I first talked, we talk about like he's an emotional storyteller, and the technical is not at the forefront. It is all about emotion. And so we talk about the emotion of each scene. We talk about languages of Oz, of dance, of music, and then we talk about goals for the movie. And he asked me what my goal was for this film, and I said that it was one of the greatest love stories between these 2 women ever made, that it is a love story like The English Patient or Gone with the Wind or Casablanca. And that was the emotion that we wanted to tell. And we needed sets to be able to let those characters perform in. And I needed to light them in a way that we could be able to look 360 degrees in almost every shot. So we had thousands and thousands of lighting cues.
Wow. John, I know in an interview once you said you turned down offers to lens Harry Potter's last parts because you felt there would be too much green screen involved. But in the end, you said, quote, "What an idiot I was," after you realized there wasn't that much involved at all. So I was curious what your kind of position is in terms of VFX versus practical in your films.
Harry Potter at the time was thought of as very VFX heavy, but I just, going to a stage with the standard way to make a sort of marble or whatever. You have 5 stages, 2 of them are, one's green, one's blue, or 2 are green. They got a bit of a half a piece of set in. There's a couple of other places, and you just go there for however many days it is, and at the end of it, you get a movie. Ridley, I think, and like me, we kind of got into this game to go around the next bend in the river. We wanted to go on location. He very rarely shoots in a studio, going to real places, real things. He builds on this old sort of Napoleonic neoclassical fort in Malta, but the background is kind of there. These are the walls of the old Napoleonic fort. It was the largest fort in the British Commonwealth. It was a big area. And then in the middle of that, you put the Colosseum, put some temples, you put the Forum, you put other temples, you put some palaces, and these are huge. Denzel and Paul the other day, they walk into Rome. It's real. Rome's the oldest city in the world, or oldest city as we understand it. So people know what it looks like. They know what it's like to be in a big arena. So you've got to get that VFX balance right. The first film, I don't think he trusted the VFX. I don't think he understood it fully, which was just as well. Gladiator is one of those magical films that people just love. So I think one of the reasons it stayed with us is that it's real. Ridley does worlds. His Rome is not really a real Rome. It's kind of mixed with classical through the ages, from the sort of the 11th century when it re-emerged, to the sort of Napoleonic time, to fascism, architecture, Albert Speer, to the modern times, Victorian times. Everything's busy. He loves the multi-camera thing, because you layer it all up. There's no inserts. Oh, here comes the insert shot. Everything is there at the time. You got to get it, and has a proper background. Even if it's an out of focus shot or close up, in the background there's lots of stuff going on. So I think his visual effects now, he enjoys that more. He likes digital. He can see the cameras. He hasn't got to run around between these enormous sets. It all pipes back to him. So that's different between the two films. Okay. Now the image is the image. Now I'd rather shoot it on film, of course, but he won't go back there. And for this sort of filmmaking, it's better suited.
I'm kind of curious for you, Greg. How do you approach kind of VFX heavy setups? I think that you're someone who I really think is so incredible in how kind of intimate and tender you can make scenes that still have pretty VFX heavy items to it. I think in Dune 1, I think Rogue One. There's a real, I think that how you kind of design a lot of those shots almost feel to me as if you were on location shooting them. Like some of the things on Arrakis truly feel just very of the world and very emotional. Like what's your process like even approaching some of those setups?
Well, listen, I think it begins with the people that you're working with, let me say, because you are only as good as the VFX supervisor and the director who will allow certain VFX to get through. So ultimately, I can't take any credit beyond the fact that I've worked with some incredibly talented people. So that's number one. Number two, one thing I've learned is that people know bad lighting. My mum knows when things aren't right. People understand it when the lighting doesn't feel real or honest. And going back to what Alice was saying before, what you were saying about trying to create that emotion and that emotiveness with light, it's very integral to try and be honest with what the lighting is that you're using and to try and mix that. Like the hardest thing I've ever been trying to do is trying to create daylight, inside. I mean, we all, face that challenge where we stick up an HMI or we stick up 100, vortexes or something and we try and create sun. It's tough. There's nothing quite like that sun. The main takeaway would be that I don't fool myself into believing something's going to be fixed in post from a lighting standpoint, because I've been burnt so many times. If it's supposed to be outside and we can shoot it outside, we do it. I would pitch. I know there are 1,000 reasons not to, weather, particularly in the UK, shooting days, winter, all those other things. There's 1,000 reasons not to do something outside. I would always try and shoot something outside if I have that chance.
All of your films are visually daring in different ways. We've got long tracking shots and Busby Berkeley shots and Emilia Pérez, thousands of extras in a single shot in Wicked, switching of POVs. That's not been done a lot before. And Nickel Boys, the list goes on and on. Greg, you shot in infrared. Which scene or sequence in your 2024 film was the most complex or most challenging for you?
It was very important for Pablo to shoot in La Scala. They've never let a film crew other than like a documentary crew. So it was finally negotiated 4 hours with $250,000. So I had to figure out, how am I going to go in and shoot this massive scene of this opera with an audience. So it was like an army. They wouldn't let me in the pre-light. So I literally went in with like 12 par cans to bounce off the ceiling, and then I brought in a bigger projector. And the way I was able to do it was work with their lighting crew, because they knew the lights on that stage. And in 45 minutes, we were up and running. So that was the most hair-raising or complicated technical part for me, was how to light the Scala in the shortest time I could.
I think the most challenging for me, because I had not worked on films of that scale before, was the ending of the film. There is a long night scene where you mixed interiors in a studio, exteriors that we shot, that happened in the desert, and we shot it in a quarry near Pérez, and full 3D VFX shot that were mixed into the thing where you can see the cars riding in the desert, and the cars, the exteriors are full 3D. So it was a lot of time to figure out what would be the right balance between all of these elements. We took this big crane. It was like a 200 feet crane, and you have this softbox that just naturally lights the set, maybe like the moon. But I think the hardest thing was just to keep everything together and consistent. And on this film, I had the first time of my life the feeling that maybe sometimes it was important to resist not just being like the CEO of the image, and keep something a bit fragile in the way you do it, and maybe to forget there are 200 people involved around you as you work, and try to imagine what it would be if you just were with the director, the actors and the actresses, and a camera, and that's all.
I think the bigger things get, the harder it is to wrangle. Alice's descriptions of what she went through, like, it blows my mind. It actually makes me have an anxiety attack, Alice, listening to the amount of sets that you had to light, and fire lane to fire lane, reds to the floor, like that sort of thing. I go, oh my God, like, because that's a significant thing to manage, and it is literally like wrangling cats. Like, it's, how do you kind of keep all that stuff in check? And then ultimately all it ends up as being, it's just an emotional shot of a character. Like, that's all we're trying to get. Like, it's nothing beyond that, so but then you've got all these other things going on, big set pieces, or multiple people, multiple extras, multiple characters, whether like as Ed's problem just had, like 45 minutes to light, like you've just got a multitude of problems. So trying to keep that in check, trying to maintain the focus on what ultimately you need to do, which is shoot emotion. You need to record emotion through that lens, and everything else be damned, But if you're not getting the emotion, then it doesn't make a difference. You may as well not be there.
Interesting. John, I'm curious about yours.
No one seems to get pre-lights anymore. I don't know if anybody else does, but yeah, the weekend something when you're going to get something. But when you're mid-stride, you're sort of lighting for the day, and you got a lot of cameras around, and then suddenly you've got a 25-ton crane with an arm on it and lights on it and horses all around it. It's in the wrong place, and people are, you've got cameras pointing straight at it. Trying to guess that riddle or be prepared to move quickly out of that position is the challenging bit. The answer to that is, I suppose the nights are difficult because you don't have all night. You'll have till about 8 o'clock. And in the summer, we shot in the summer. It's the wrong time of year. Previous film we shot really in the beginning of the year, and we had longer light and blah, blah, blah. So, you're never going to get the sweet light at the end of the day or beginning of the day. But also the night, when it comes, it will come late in the evening. And by then, he just wants to be gone. So you better get it all ready at once. You won't actually get an exposure or an idea of how your lights are working until that moment when the fire starts cutting through, the lights start cutting through, your big lights. So, yeah, I think the nights on Gladiator were the biggest challenge.
For us, it really came down to, in thinking about point of view, just how deeply literate everyone is with that perspective. We spend our entire lives inside of our own bodies. So there's a way in which you kind of can't hide. And so towards that, it's also that Ramel and I, we wanted POV, but we wanted fundamentally poetic images. So towards that, it was a situation where every single scene we designed as a oneer. We knew we would cut it up, but we wanted to spare the actors more artifice than they were already interacting with, looking into the camera and having these apparatus. So, it meant building a lot of custom apparatuses for every single shot to get it done from that point of view, and doing all the lighting with almost all reflective surfaces, where I would just surround buildings with mirrors and put mirrors on condors and redirect light into spaces. So there was almost no stands on the ground, any lights on set, where the actors could truly feel like they didn't have to hit any marks and they could kind of just go. And then as a camera, we had so many different modular designs to, again, try to get that perspective. Since we were after a feeling and an emotion, it's, if I was trying to think of what point of view might look like, I might grab something like a Steadicam, because we as humans stabilize our own vision in our mind. But in reality, seeing it put up, it actually looked more ghostly. So there was a way in which, handheld actually feels more present. It feels more inside a body, maybe because of just the general grammar of cinema up until this point, that feels more connected. But again, it was doing handheld, doing remote heads in mimic mode, and kind of putting a remote head in front of an actor underslung. And then in another room, I could do handheld and look down on my body, and the camera would look down on the actor's body. Engineering, basically industrial easy rigs for the difference sometimes of feeling a shot connected to your spine moving through a space, and more connected to your neck and looking around, and kind of having a camera float and operating it from my wrist became kind of more advantageous than operating it from my shoulder. Needing to build custom body rigs for the actors for certain shots. So there was a way in which it was a lot of engineering, and each scene kind of needed a very specific camera system that could take you from the top of the scene to the bottom of the scene. And again, just that aspect of it where looking at a monitor, sometimes the difference can be centimeters different between something feeling uncanny and something feeling inside a body. So, it was always kind of that dance throughout the movie, and these shots feel really organic, feel inside a body. But as you were speaking about earlier, it's like they were meticulously designed between Ramel and I to kind of match this feeling of sight and connecting, different pieces together and hooking them together. Again, it's, the question of, what is an establishing shot? What is a cut? What is a transition when you are fundamentally only in the perspective of one, if not two characters throughout a movie? It really became about us trying to think more broadly, and again, almost at a quantum level, of how do we articulate meaning in cinema? And then with this perspective, how do we kind of reform and rejigger those things so that we can still have a shot that has these traditional aspects of cinema in it, even though they've been reworked or realigned to maybe articulate that idea in a slightly different way. It's like the simplest shots in the movie. Oftentimes there's a shot in the movie where our protagonist is on a bus and he looks down and he sees a young girl kind of climbing or like kind of moving her way underneath the seats, and he leans down and then looks under his chair as she kind of moves her way through the seats and goes up with her parents while the bus is moving. And it's like a shot like that involved us taking a period bus, undoing all the seats inside of the bus, lifting a dolly into the bus, putting dolly track on the bus, strapping it all down, putting a remote head on that dolly so that when the head goes forward, we're dollying forward, and then we're booming down as the remote head is in mimic mode and is looking under the seat to see the girl moving, and the bus is moving so that the light is playing in a dynamic fashion. Is like, there's so many shots of the movie that I think seem and look very kind of simply gestured, but almost every single shot in the movie had some amount of intense orchestration to get it done. But again, trying to get it done, not to just do it, but to do it in a way that felt poetic, that felt organic, that felt natural, and maintaining that kind of ethos throughout the movie. So not getting too overwhelmed by the technical aspect of it, but also having to, in many cases, kind of invent what we needed to get that done.
I think the point that you raised, like, it's kind of part of our job is to shield the audience from all that garbage, isn't it? Like, that's
Totally.
part of our job as filmmakers. Is like, you don't want anybody thinking about what you just described. I mean, as you were telling me that, I was going, of course you did that. It makes total sense. But I wouldn't have thought when you were describing the shot that it would have been so involved. So hopefully the audience doesn't think, I'm sure the audience doesn't think that, which is fantastic.
Alice, what about you? And was it Defying Gravity?
It was Defying Gravity. I think early on in the movie, John and I, during our lengthy prep, we talked about the theme of the light is not the light and the darkness is not the darkness. Good is not good and evil is not evil in our movie. So I had this idea that the sun would always rise for Glinda and always set for Elphaba. And so I asked John, can I go through the script and present ideas of time of day that aren't, they might not be what lines up with the script. So for instance, we meet Glinda in her bubble and it's bright and it's beautiful and wondrous, and Oz is this beautiful bright space. And then and so we meet her during the day and she meets Fiero in the morning, and Elphaba meets Fiero at night, and there's a long sunset sequence that we did through I'm Not That Girl, and then in Popular, the sun rises for Glinda, and then the last 40 minutes of the movie that takes us through the end of Defying Gravity is all one long sunset. And I had this image of what the sunset was going to be like, and I kept showing it to everyone. I'm like, this is what the end of our movie is going to look like. And I had to get everyone on board, and I also had to get everyone on board with the fact that Emerald City is our biggest set, and so instead of shooting that during the day, which is what it was in the script, it was going to be night for sundown. So we had I had to get everyone, including the producers, it costs a lot more money to shoot at night, to agree to this idea. And then we go through the Wizard's Palace, and we end up on top of the highest tower in Emerald City, and Elphaba finds her power as she leaps off a building and into the sunset, and as darkness descends. And it was such a huge challenge to get everyone to agree to this idea. Our movie goes from the brightest of bright to the darkest of dark scenes, and I'm just very proud of Defying Gravity.
Paul, you had a similar, you used lighting in a similar way, right? Much of the first part of the movie is in the dark, and daylight only really appears when Emilia wakes up in the hospital, which I thought was very interesting. I'd love for you to talk about that stylistic choice.
That was really a script thing, you know. The in the script that was first sent to me, it was still in the opera form. There were 5 acts in the film, and the first act, when Emilia is still Manitas, this drug lord, and the first act is happening by night, and it's and then the light comes in the second act, and the film was ending also by night, but in a very different night. So my work was not really to decide that. It was much more to decide what kind of night would be the first act and what kind of night would be the last act. And for the first night, it was pretty easy in the way we approached it. We thought, okay, even if we're on a studio, it should feel natural. So the first big musical scene is a market building up Zoe Saldana, who is dancing and singing in Mexico, but that was shot in a studio, obviously. And we actually brought a lot of references and even light bulbs that we bought in Mexico, equipped all the lighting stands with wheels, and it was equipped with batteries. And the choice was to do only practicals for this sequence. And obviously with a lot of lighting in the frame. I don't know, like in Good Time or Uncut Gems, this use of light you can see where it's just a very conscious and choice of practicals almost sometimes. And it's maybe the hardest things to achieve. And the last night was not as contrasty. You don't have these highlights to feel that the black is black and the colors pop out thanks to these bright lights that you have in the frame. The Last Night is something that's much more made. We were talking about Nope, for example, or Zero Dark 30 as movies where you explore a kind of night where you just are staying in the bottom 10% of the signal. And suddenly, because of the cinema technology, you don't have any highlights anymore, so the screen looks gray, actually. And the whole question is, how long should I stay into this shot? Or is the shot long enough not to have any highlight? And maybe I can have one shot in the middle of those shots that will be extremely bright. I don't know, a gunshot, for example, that just resets the eye and just makes you feel that the black is black again. And that was a much more complicated night to set up, obviously.
What I think everyone's talking about a psychological authenticity, whatever style the film that you're shooting in, you want people to believe what the image represents. What's so important is we, as the operator, even if you're not operating, is that we're another actor. For me, we give a performance in the action with the actors, through light, through movement of the camera, through our movement with the camera, that enhances what the emotions are for the story. And that's, something that I don't think gets discussed about, how the movement is. And if acting is acting and reacting, what they say acting is about, that's really another aspect of what we do as cinematographers, is we're able to interplay with the images but also with the performance.
Well, that's a very wonderful place to end. I do have thousands of more questions, but alas, too little time in the day. Thank you all so much for joining the Cinematographer Roundtable. Such wonderful films, great year of cinema. I really appreciate all your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.